Hi, everyone. We're going to start one section of the course now, which is going to be about statistics. So you're going to kind of get like a little introduction to statistics, and hopefully that will help you to better understand some of the data that you see in the world around you, how to read certain articles, particularly maybe in another science class or a medical class, etc., and just kind of things to think about when you're looking at data. So this first section really goes through a lot of different definitions and then organization techniques. So that's what we're going to focus on in section 12.1. So first, what is the difference between a population and a sample? So a population is the set containing all people or objects whose properties are to be described and analyzed by the data collector. And the sample is a subset or subgroup of the population. So for instance, maybe my population would be all MAT126 community college students. Perhaps I want to know their opinions on statistics courses. So maybe I have a survey that I've created and I would really love to know how students feel about their statistics course. Realistically, though, it may be difficult for me to actually get every single statistics student on campus to take my survey. That would probably be a little bit unrealistic. So what we do is we take a sample instead. So instead of getting data from the entire group, we look at just a part of that group, and that would be a sample. So for instance, a group of hotel owners in a large city decided to conduct a survey among citizens of the city to discover their opinions about casino gambling. So what we're going to do is first describe the population, and then we'll answer question B. Okay, so in this case, again, we're looking at a group of hotel owners who are in a large city, and they decide to conduct a survey among citizens of the city to discover their opinions about casino gambling. So who is their target audience here? Their target audience are all citizens of this city. So that's the population. Now, one of the hotel owners suggests obtaining a sample by surveying all people at 6 of the largest nightclubs in the city on a Saturday night. Each person will be asked to express his or her opinion on casino gambling. And the question is, does this seem like a good idea? So again, let's go back to what we're looking at. So there are hotel owners in the city, and it looks like they're thinking about maybe bringing in some sort of casino and getting people's opinions on that, right? So they want to know the city's opinion on casino gambling, so the citizens within. Now, it would be unrealistic to actually be able to survey probably the entire city. It's just not going to happen. Either it would take too much time or too much money, or it's just not realistic. So what we typically do is we get a sample. Now, when we get a sample, though, we want our sample to be representative of the population. So we want to make sure that the result of the sample actually would represent what the population thinks overall, or else the data is not helpful. So one of the owners suggests obtaining the sample from surveying people at 6 of the largest nightclubs in the city on a Saturday night. And then they'll be asked their opinion on casino gambling. So is this a good idea? The answer is no. And the reason it's no is because by surveying only people at nightclubs, or 6 of the largest nightclubs, you're not really getting the overall perception of all citizens in the city, right? You're only focusing on people who go to nightclubs, particularly these 6 largest nightclubs. So it may not represent the opinion of everybody in the city because you're focusing actually on a small group here, but this group does not represent the overall population. So is this a good idea? No, probably not. So citizens at the nightclubs likely would not represent the population overall. So that would not be a good way to get a sample here from the city, right? Another thing to think about too is this group likely, so I'm just kind of hypothesizing here, this group likely we're probably more in favor of casino gambling. Again, we're just guessing if they're out at the nightclub. on Saturday night, then they maybe are a more likely group that would be interested in going out to a casino as well. Again, I'm generalizing that group of people, of course, but it would seem like that this group would probably more likely be more interested in the casino than maybe other groups as well. So the big thing here, though, is that this group is definitely not going to represent all citizens in the city. You're only taking just citizens who go to these specific nightclubs on Saturday night. Now, what you want to do is you want to random sample. That is the correct way to get a good sample that will be representative of the population. And you want to do it such that every person in the population or every item, depending on what you're looking at, has the same chance of being selected for the sample. In our last case, that was not the case. We were only looking at people who went to these 6 nightclubs. So not everybody in the city would have the opportunity to be selected for this survey, right? So the correct way to use small groups or samples to make generalizations about these large groups or populations is that the sample must be representative of the population. And to do this, we want every member of the population to have an equal chance of being selected. And that's the key here. So everybody in the population has an equal chance of being selected. So you're not targeting just people who go to nightclubs or just people who go to grocery stores, or just people who live in this one neighborhood, for instance, right? You're looking at the whole city so that everybody has an equal chance of being surveyed. A random sample is a sample that's obtained in such a way that every element in the population, again, has an equal chance of being selected. And that's the most important thing here. So you can equate this idea to picking a name out of a hat. So let's say I was looking at MAT126 students and I want to do my survey on statistics courses. Well, I could put every single student's name, theoretically speaking, into a hat, right? And then just kind of randomly pick out names. So every student's name is in that hat and everybody has that same equal chance of being selected, right? So I'm using the same size paper, it's folded the same exact way. So there's no hindrance there about someone not being selected. What we really do is we tend to use computers to do this for us. So usually what we do with technology now is computers can generate random numbers. Your calculator, if you have a TI-83 or 84, can actually do that too. And there's lots of random generators online. So computers can randomly generate numbers. So what we often do instead is every member of the population will be assigned a number. So for instance, I could be number 1, you could be number 2, and so on. And then the computer will randomly select numbers, and those people will be chosen. So again, everybody has a designated number. All those numbers have the option to be chosen, so we all have an equal chance of being chosen, but the computer will randomly select certain numbers for that survey. So that's usually what happens more likely than not. It does mimic this idea of picking a name out of a hat, so it works the same way. When people, so here's another idea, sorry, I'm jumping topics a little bit. When people are allowed to self-select into a survey, such as call-in polls on radio or television, this sample is not as reliable and does not usually represent the population well. So there's a lot of surveys that you see, particularly online, or sometimes in the news or radio or TV shows, things like that, where you can choose to participate, right? So they may have a number at the bottom of the screen, say, hey, call this number to take our survey, or go to this website to take our survey. You see them a lot in the back of magazines. So the one I used to always mention was, and I don't know if they still do it, but Women's Health used to always do a survey at the end called The Average American Woman. But that was a self-selected survey. So you actually had to go to the website and actually answer the questions. So it really isn't the average American woman. It's the average American woman who reads your magazine and then chooses to go to the website to take your survey. It really does not represent all women in the United States, for instance. So anytime you have a self-selected survey where anybody, whoever sees that website or that phone number, can call in and take the survey or go to the website, that is usually not a good representation. Usually what happens is people who choose to call in to things like this or choose to go to that website to take a survey tend to have very strong feelings on the subject. So they usually sway either positive or negative very strongly, and they sway your data. So it may not be representative of the whole population. So self-selected surveys, although they're fun, you see them a lot in magazines in particular, and newspapers, things like that. They are not necessarily representative of the population. So you want to do a correct random sample survey when you have data. And if you see things like this, just take them with a grain of salt. So you can have fun with them and you can say, oh, that was really interesting, but keep in mind that it probably doesn't represent the actual population of what you're looking at. So let's return to the hotel owners in the large city who are interested in how the city's citizens feel about casino gambling. Which of the following would be the most appropriate way to select a random sample? Okay. So we could randomly survey people who live in the oceanfront condominiums in the city. We could survey the first 200 people whose names appear in the city's telephone directory. And we can randomly select neighborhoods of the city and then randomly survey people within the selected neighborhoods. Now, the first one is bad. We do see random, which is good, but you're only looking at people who live in this one specific area. So only the people who live in the oceanfront condominiums of the city. This likely does not represent the entire population. I would assume that people who can afford oceanfront property are probably and maybe in an upper class for wealth. So maybe that does not represent your city. Maybe that's just one small subgroup of the city, but it doesn't represent everybody overall. Or maybe they feel differently because maybe they live on the ocean and maybe there's already a lot of hotels down there and they don't want any more, right? So this is not a group that's representative of the whole city. So even though it says random, that's not going to target the whole city's population. The second one says we're going to survey just the first 200 people whose name appear in the telephone directory. Again, this is not random at all. You're taking the whole first 200. And also here, not everybody in the city may have their name in the telephone directory. A lot of people choose not to have their name in the telephone directory. A lot of people now have cell phones, which may not be listed. A lot of times landlines were originally listed in telephone directories. And again, it's just the first 200 names. So this is not a random sample at all. Your best choice here is C. So you are randomly selecting neighborhoods of the city and then also randomly selecting people within those neighborhoods. So although you're not looking at surveying every single neighborhood, every single person still has a chance to be selected. So let's say you take your city and you break it down into 20 neighborhoods. Well, all 20 neighborhoods still have the same chance of being selected, 1 out of 20. So everybody still does have that equal chance of being selected. So first you're selecting your neighborhoods, and then within those neighborhoods, you would again randomly select the people there as well, because likely you cannot survey every single person even within a neighborhood. So this is your best option here to find a sample in this case. Now, surveys and polls involve data from a sample of some population. So ideally, we would love to have population data. So we'd love to know everyone's opinion on every single thing. It's just not realistic. Usually time-wise or money-wise, financially, it just doesn't make sense to do. So the US Census, which does collect data, obviously, is one survey that does attempt to include the entire population, right? So the US Census theoretically should be the entire population, but even then, not everybody responds to the census survey, right? A lot of people just choose not to respond to it. Some people may move often, so they may not receive the survey because maybe they've moved and they don't have their current address on file. You have people who may be homeless or transient, so again, they may not be counted as well. So even with something like the census, that tries to be the population, it still likely is not going to be everybody. And you can look in your text on page 775. It gives a nice little blurb about the US Census there. It's actually very important to complete because it helps with how states in the country allocates money for taxes and things like that. But really, a lot of people do not participate. So in the 2000 census, for instance, only 67% of households responded. That was in 2000. So, even there, it's not perfect. And then regardless of the sampling technique used, The sample should exhibit characteristics typical of those possessed by the target population. Again, you want your sample to reflect your population, or else just throw the whole thing away. There's no point in analyzing it, because the reason we sample is to learn about the population. That's really what we do. So we want our sample to be a representative sample so that it mirrors the population. Now, we can't always guarantee that, but we always do the best we can to do that. And the main way we do that is to use random samples. So we really do our best to try to make sure that everybody has an equal chance of being selected for that survey so that it is as representative as it possibly can be of the population.